Hi, thanks for joining me, Marnie Og, and Dark Sky Conversations. As always, it's lovely to have my guests chat to me about their ideas about dark sky conservation and their contribution, whatever it may be. So today's guest is Professor Chris Lidman. He's the director of Siding-Springs-Observatory, and you'll hear us talk about the National Optical Telescope for Australia based in Coonabarabran. We mentioned the Crooked Mountains that are around the observatory, and these are called Warrumbungle. That's a Gomeroi word, literally meaning Crooked Mountains. The site is about a 6-hour drive from Sydney or from 2 hours from Dubbo. So if you're thinking of heading up that way, it's a lovely holiday destination, particularly for families. Anyway, Siding-Spring Observatory was the first place in Australia to introduce dark sky guidelines, and there's a recent update being done to them now. If you'd like to check them out, you can go to the New South Wales Department of Planning website and use them to help you create some dark sky conservation principles as well. Enjoy our conversation. Thank you.
Hi, with a flick of a switch, we turn night to day and day to night. We can change seasons, actions and states of mind. Light is everywhere, used endlessly and very much a part of our modern world. But what is it? How do we use it? And how is it changing our environment and our behaviours? A star-filled sky used to be our evening's entertainment. Now it's Netflix, iPads, or even a podcast. When was the last time you looked at the night sky? I'm Marnie Og, and this is Dark Sky Conversations, the podcast that brings people and science together to shed light.
Hello, good morning, good evening, or whatever time of the day it is that you're listening to this podcast. I'm delighted to have my friend, my colleague, and my dark sky advocate, Chris Lidman, with me today, who's the director of Siding-Spring Observatory. And Chris, I always think people can tell us more about themselves than I can ever do in an intro. So you're the director of Siding-Spring Observatory. What does that mean?
Oh, well, good morning, Marnie. First, because we're both in mornings at the moment.
Yeah.
And, hello to all our listeners. Director, it's quite a diverse role. One is to manage all the staff at the observatory. One is to advertise the observatory more broadly, not just to the scientific community, but also to the communities near the observatory and further afield, because it's also quite a popular tourist destination. We have a lot of people who come to visit the observatories, have a look at the telescopes. And of course, a very important role is to advocate for dark skies, because without dark skies, the observatory would not be able to do the work that it does. And the work at the observatory covers many areas in astronomy. It's becoming a little bit broader now. There's also interest in using the observatory to understand what's up close to the Earth and what's called space situational awareness. As many of you listeners probably know, that lots of satellites are being put up into space, and it's getting a bit crowded up there. And so we'd like to make sure that we have good control of what's up there. Of course, that also links into dark skies, because having lots of satellites up there does mean that there's an additional source of light pollution that we've not seen so much in the past, and that's the sunlight reflecting off these satellites as they pass overhead. So a very diverse job. I'm based here in Canberra, but I do get a chance to go to the observatory typically once a month, and I'll be going up there next week, and I very much look forward to my visits up there. It's a beautiful part of Australia, located on the edge of the Warrumbungle National Park. I always love the views from up there, not just of the night skies, but also the nature that's up there, and lots of wildlife up there as well.
It is a pretty special part of the world, and I have to say that the first time I went up there, which is probably was up there at the age of 5, and with my father, who was a very avid amateur astronomer, and I actually got chased by an emu I had a chocolate bar in my hand, so I always remember being run towards by an emu. Warrumbungles, but to describe this natural piece of wonderland, it's a volcanic area, isn't it? Full of volcanic plugs. How high is it, Chris?
The observatory itself is 1,200 metres, and that's one of the highest peaks in the Warrumbungle Range. There's a couple which are slightly higher, but you're right about describing it as a wonderland. All those volcanic features, the spires, the plugs, some of the bluffs are wonderful. In fact, from the observatory itself, you've got a wonderful view of what's known as the Grand High Tops, and there's some wonderful walking in that area. Really, really pretty and very accessible too. It's only 40 minutes from Coonabarabran, and you park the car and you can go off and walk.
Yeah.
So it's lovely.
It's not to mention the sunset views from up the top there, which if you're lucky enough to be up there at sunset, you see the sun literally dipping down right along the western plain there. I do remember bringing up some of the team from Destination New South Wales and saying, why isn't this more of a tourist destination? I think it is still a bit of a hidden gem for many people. And maybe this podcast might go some way in getting people there. So, Chris, why was Siding Spring chosen? What do you know?
Yes, that's a good question. So, astronomers look for certain things. First of all, dark skies. So you want to be away from major cities that have lots of light pollution. Clear skies, so relatively good weather, which means you typically tend to be in remote areas or areas which are relatively dry. And mountaintop is another reason. The more you're above the Earth's atmosphere, the less distortion you have of the images that you take. So you get clearer, better images if you're higher up.
So less twinkling.
Less twinkling of the stars. That's a good way of putting it. And so you're higher up, you have less twinkling, you have clearer images. So being on top of a mountain is what you're looking for. Now, Australia doesn't have many tall mountains. Kosciuszko is the highest at 2,000 metres. If you went to some observatories overseas, they're based much higher. So in Mauna Kea is a good example. That's over 4,000 metres. The high Altiplano in northern Chile, Chagnam is at 5,000 metres. At that sort of height, it starts getting hard to breathe. So, we don't have great mountains in Australia, but also because of our geographical location. There's another reason why Siding Springs is there. In particular, when you're looking at transient astronomical phenomena, supernova, gravitational wave events, you need to have coverage, longitudinal coverage. So you want to have a telescope in Chile, you want to have a telescope in South Africa, and of course, you want a telescope in Australia. So that's another reason why Siding Spring is quite important, is its longitudinal coverage, in addition to the dark skies, high mountaintop, and relatively good climate.
And if I'm not mistaken, the site's going to be celebrating a significant birthday in the next little while.
That's right. So next year is 50 years since now King Charles III came to visit the telescope, the Anglo-Australian telescope, to open the telescope. That was in 1974, October 1974. So we're planning to have a big celebration next year, October 2024, which will coincide also with what traditionally is Starfest, which usually occurs the October long weekend, and that will occur this year as normal. But next year it'll be extra special because we'll be celebrating 50 years of the AAT.
So my I guess the thing that I know about Siding Spring is that it was really possible for a couple of reasons. One was that it was already being used, before it became the National Optical Telescope, it was already being used as an observatory. But really what its success was due to, well, not just Australian ingenuity, and which we've still maintained, really, that the telescope is not such a young lady anymore, but doing some amazing work still. But it was really the introduction of easy long-haul flights that astronomers could travel anywhere around the world and actually do observing in Australia. And
You're right. That's another key aspect of locating an observatory. Maybe less critical now than it was in the past, but that's easy access. 50, 60 years ago, putting a telescope, say, in the northwestern part of Western Australia would have been an extremely challenging thing to do. So access to engineering support, technical support for the telescopes was an important part of choosing the site. It has evolved, though, over the last 10, 20 years. So previously, astronomers from the UK or from elsewhere would have flown to Australia to use the telescope at Siding Spring, in particular the Anglo-Australian telescope. They would have flown all the way from Europe to spend a couple of nights in the telescope and then fly all the way back. That's before the age of the internet. Now we have the internet. Actually, most astronomers use a telescope remotely. So they would be in the comfort of their office or at home. They would log into the telescope control system and use the telescope at night. That has some positives and negatives. Positive is that you don't spend so much of your time traveling. The negative, of course, is that you don't travel. When I was starting off as an astronomer, one of the nicest parts of the job was to travel to these remote areas, remote locations, spend a few days there doing some research, but also enjoying the area that was around the telescope. That's still possible now, but it's done much less frequently. Yeah, it has changed.
So where are some of the places that you've worked, Chris? Tell us about some of the wonder, because they're always beautiful areas. They are.
Yes. So I guess I did my studies here in Canberra at the Australian National University. And when I finished, I got a position at the European Southern Observatory. The European Southern Observatory has telescopes in Chile, in northern Chile, in particular, a couple of observatories which are called the La Silla Observatory. And a bit further north of that is the Paranal Observatory. And these are remarkable places. People probably have heard of the Atacama Desert, an extremely dry place on the planet. But until you go there, you don't realize how dry it is. I understand there are some places there where it hasn't rained in the last 100 years. And when you go there, you say, yes, I can see it hasn't rained in the last 100 years because there's absolutely nothing. There's not even a single blade of grass. There's no insects. It's just completely dry and barren. So not particularly good for human beings, but for an observatory, it's a very good location because, of course, since it's not raining, it means that most of the nights are clear. And so you can observe objects pretty much every night of the year. But it's a bit hard on the human body because the humidity can be sometimes low as 0%. And the human body does not react very well to such low humidities. Most of the accommodation up there there's some atmospheric control. There's a humidifiers. So, but wonderful area, northern Chile, lots of mountains. A bit further south in Chile, of course, it gets a bit wetter, and so there's more forest and a bit more greenery. But in the north, you've got these amazing areas, the salars. There's a bit of wildlife. If you go higher up into the Altiplano, you have what are known as vicuñas and vizcachas, some small animals. Vicuñas like a deer, but amazing.
Yeah.
So I spent 14 years in Chile.
Goodness, wow. Well, you'd know it well then. Yeah.
Yeah. My really wonderful part of my life, and I do look forward to going to visit friends that I have over there when I spent those 14 years in Chile.
So then, what brought you back to Australia?
There was an opportunity here in Australia to apply for a grant, which allowed me to do some research that was on my list of things to do. So I applied for that grant and I was successful in getting it. So that brought me back to Australia, and I worked for the Australian Astronomical Observatory, which was based in Sydney. That was from 2010 to about 2018. And that's when I became reintroduced to Siding-Spring Observatory. I had been observing at Siding-Spring Observatory as part of my PhD, so that was 30 odd years ago. So I knew the place, but an opportunity to come back to Australia, work for the Australian Astronomical Observatory, do some research that I've always wanted to do, and then refamiliarise myself with the Anglo-Australian telescope and the other telescope at Siding Spring. So that's why I came back to Australia.
So what's happened in that time to Siding Spring, Chris? I think it, maintained a great tradition of research up there. So what's allowed that to happen, and what's happened over that time?
That's a good question. So one of the things that makes the observatory very special are the people and the ingenuity of the people. So there are some instruments on some of the telescopes. In particular, I'm thinking of the Anglo-Australian telescope and the GDF fiber positioner. That instrument is unique, and it's maintained by technicians at the observatory, and it gives us uniqueness in its capabilities. It is one of the most in-demand instruments at the observatory. It's in strong demand by our overseas colleagues who want to use this facility, and this means that the observatory is producing cutting-edge science. Even though it's a relatively small observatory compared to some of the observatories in Chile, it punches above its weight. The AET, for example, consistently ranks as one of the 10 most scientifically productive facilities in the world.
And that's based on the number of papers that are produced?
That's based on a number of metrics, and papers is one metric. The number of citations that these papers get is another metric. And over the last many decades, the AET has always been very, very, very highly ranked, even though it's 50 years old now, almost 50 years old. And it had an observing site, which also is not as good as the ones in Chile. It's still a very good observing site, but it doesn't have as many clear nights as the one in Chile. So it does very well. And there's a lot of interest from international organizations, national organizations to establish facilities at Siding Springs for the reason that I alluded to a little bit earlier, which is its geographical location. So not only is it a good observing site, it's well located. And so if you're interested in studying transient phenomena or in space situational awareness, then you need to have a facility somewhere in Australia. And since Siding Springs is already there and it's a good site, then many organisations base their facilities at SSO. And that's something that's going to continue quite strongly into the future.
Well, yeah, as you said, the geographical positioning, you can't really change that. And that's... So, yeah, I could ask a question, all sorts of questions there about, what happens if we don't maintain dark skies at Siding Spring, for example.
So that's a very good question, and one only has to look at other observatories around the world where light pollution has become a problem. A good example is here in Canberra. One had the telescopes here at Mount Stromlo Observatory. For your listeners, Mount Stromlo is located about 15 kilometres from the centre of Canberra, and light pollution was always a problem. It's the reason why Siding Spring Observatory was established 60 years ago. Astronomers realised back then that Canberra was a growing city and that eventually the night sky would be too bright to do astronomical observations. And so they moved the observatory north to a location where the skies were pristine and still are pristine.
Well, that was my question. How is it? How are we doing up there at Siding Spring? And yeah,
we're doing really well, I think. We have good community support, which is really, really critical. And we measure the night sky darkness, and we don't see it changing. It's as dark now as it was 50 years ago. There are more lights on the horizon, but they're far enough away not to be an issue. It's I guess relatively areas that are close to the observatory, which we need to keep an eye on. But we have that good support from the community to project the dark skies. And of course, we try to. There's a benefit not just for the observatory here. There's a broader benefit to keeping night skies dark, and these benefits extend to human beings. We need darkness to sleep. To animals, to fauna who need the dark sky. It's part of their environment, and of course, good lighting saves energy.
Yeah.
And we all know that these days the price of energy is very high and becoming more expensive. So anything that one can do to save energy and reduce cost is also a big positive.
Yeah. I've been sliding that into my talks recently, saying, we've got an energy crisis. How about we just turn the lights down or off between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. and it would be, I'd love to get someone to do the analysis on that, on what we would save if we did that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's also educating people about the principles of good lighting. If lighting is needed, how to design it so that it's just lighting what it needs to light with the appropriate light levels and at the appropriate times. And that's simple things that one can do that mean you still got the light, but you've also protecting the dark skies at the same time.
You're listening to Dark Sky Conversations with Marnie Ogg. We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
So you mentioned community awareness and engagement. How has Siding Spring gone about doing that? How have you managed to keep the community on board?
A couple of things. So we engage directly with the local councils. There are 4 local government areas which we work with quite closely. We have events to highlight the dark skies. So
or low light the dark skies, yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Sorry, bad pun. Yeah.
Yeah, no, good. So if during Starfest we have the block lecture where we invite an astronomer to talk about astronomy, and that's a way of the observatory thanking the local community for being so vigilant with their lighting and helping us control lighting. And of course, there's the Dark Sky Park, which includes the Warrumbungle National Park and also the observatory itself. So having that Dark Sky Park there also helps promote the idea of protecting our dark skies.
Yeah, and because I have the privilege of sitting on some of the committees out there, seeing from a tourist benefit, the upswing of people going out there just simply to experience something perhaps that they won't see in their own hometown, of being out under the stars and knowing it's a protected area for that.
Yeah. I mean, seeing the stars in their sort of natural state is really quite awe-inspiring. And I was happening to listen to a interview with a young child on the ABC radio this morning, and he had a problem with his eyesight, and then they were able to fix it, and he was able to just see the stars for the first time. So I think that sort of wonder and awe is something that we undervalue perhaps a little bit. Those of us who live in cities, we don't get to see the night sky as it should. And until you get to these truly dark areas, dark places, you're missing that.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I've heard similar stories with things like bird call. So if you live in a city where you never hear bird call, it's something that you don't miss. And I think if we don't introduce people to the night sky, or if we just blanket our world with light pollution and none of us ever see it, then we won't miss it. We won't know what we're missing. But it also means we don't understand, we're perhaps not introduced to space science or astronomy or the wonder of the world or navigation or any of those other things that looking at the stars have introduced to us and to our cultures. Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. The seeing the night sky in its natural state not only gives you a sense of wonder, it also makes you think a little bit about our place in the universe, and also gives you some thought about science and technology and science in general. So I think having the dark sky, not having a dark sky, we would lose a lot.
So, Chris, I'm going to ask you about the dark sky guidelines and just what are they? What's the purpose? And what sort of questions do you get, thrown to you as the director of Siding Spring Observatory?
So, yes, the dark sky guidelines is a guideline produced by the New South Wales government with suggestions on good lighting practices and principles for reducing light pollution. It is an excellent document, so we thank the New South Wales government for producing this document. And it's really just a document to explain the issue of light pollution and the simple measures that we can take to reduce light pollution, protect the observatory, and also reduce energy costs. It's available on the government website. You just Google Dark Sky Guidelines, and you'll eventually find a link to it. And it's about 20 pages long, and with lots of useful information and suggestions on what you can do to help reduce light pollution. The purpose there is for everyone. It's for local homeowners. It's for large extraction industries. It's the purpose there is broad.
And do you get many questions about it, because it's basically within a 200-kilometre radius of Siding Spring?
Yes. So these dark sky guidelines can be applied anywhere, but within the observatory there are certain regions, 12, 18 kilometres, and then 200 kilometres from the observatory. And depending on your distance, there are different regulations that you need to follow. So that is all discussed and described in the Dark Sky Guidelines. But those guidelines, I think, are useful for everyone, no matter how far away you're from the observatory, because they're mostly common sense measures that you can use to reduce light pollution.
Are you finding you're getting more and more questions about it, or are people just taking it, something that's so foreign to them that people don't understand them or don't know about them, and therefore it might come as a shock? Or is it something that people are becoming more aware of and then just ask you general input?
Yeah, so I think people are becoming much more aware of it. And the way I see it is from development applications and that I see. I see that they're already aware of the Dark Sky Guidelines, and they mentioned that in the application. So one of my jobs is to assess some development applications for the lights that they have, and I see that they've already taken into account most of the very common sense approaches that you can take to reduce light pollution by referring to Dark Sky Guide. So I think overall there is an awareness from developers, let's say, or large extraction industries that these guidelines exist. Maybe from the general public, there's probably less awareness. But overall, I think there's been an increase in awareness of those guidelines over the last 5 years. Of course, this year we reviewed them, so there'll be a slightly revised version of the Dark Sky Guidelines, because one of the things about lighting technology is that it changes very quickly. So
yes. Yeah.
20 years ago, who was using LEDs, right? Now we use them everywhere because they're just so energy efficient. And one of the concerns about LEDs, of course, is the colours that you get from LEDs. Many people who drive on country roads have these LED car lights, which are blue colour. They just blind you on the road, right?
I've heard you say that that's probably one of the worst source of light that you get at the observatory, with these headlights flicking up to the observatory.
Yes. And so you need to revise your guidelines to reflect changes in technology. And so one of the things we recommend in the guidelines is to use what we call a warm temperatures LEDs, which have a sort of more of an orangey color, because two reasons. One, it's less harsh on the eyes at night, and blue light scatters more efficiently in the atmosphere than redder light. And so I have a strong preference for people to use the more orangey colors than the bright blue colors, because the orange light will scatter less and contribute less to light pollution than the blue light.
Yeah. And it is amazing, actually, when you do get up there at night and you have a dark night. It is, and I've been fortunate to take guests up there and experience, new moon, and just they're shocked at this wall of blackness that they walk into and think that they can find their way through it. And if you've not experienced that before, it's quite an experience to find yourself immersed in a black blanket, really. It's
Yes. Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, when it's cloudy up there, it's black. You cannot see the hand in front of your face. Now, when the clouds disappear, you then got the natural light from the stars. So you can actually see a little bit of the ground around you, but not much. But one of the other things that really is, I guess, due to our geographical location is that we've got a fantastic view of the Milky Way galaxy, the center of our galaxy. During the winter nights, at the beginning of the nights, we see the center of our galaxy directly overhead. That's something that those who live in the northern hemisphere don't have. So we do. And so we get to see this amazing edge-on galaxy, which we live in, directly overhead.
And
Stunning.
And the beautiful emu in the night sky too.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. So that, if you're living in the city, you simply would never see that.
No.
Wouldn't see this, what is interstellar dust in the foreground of the background stars, creating the shape of an emu. And it's quite distinctive.
It is. It's lovely. So, Chris, I'm going to start winding up, but to do so, I'd love to hear your most recent or best or first dark sky experience. What stands out for you? Was it something that turned you on to astronomy, or it doesn't have to be?
Oh, I mean, certainly before I became a professional astronomer, I was an avid amateur astronomer. And so I do recall sitting in the backyard of my parents' place looking at Comet Halley, when it came through in the 1980s. And then a little bit later was supernova 1987A, which was a naked eye supernova in the Large Magellanic Cloud. That's another thing you can't see from the
Northern Hemisphere.
City or the Northern Hemisphere are the Magellanic Clouds. And for our listeners, the Magellanic Clouds are satellite galaxies which are orbiting our own. And there was a supernova which occurred in the Large Magellanic Cloud, which is the brighter of the two. And that was naked eye. But in the city, you probably wouldn't be able to see it.
Really?
In the countryside where you had the dark sky, you could see it. And I just found it amazing that you could see this object, which was an exploding star, which would have occurred maybe 100,000 years earlier, because it takes time for light to travel between clouds and us. So that was.
How long did you see it for, Chris? How long was it visible for?
It was visible for a few weeks.
Oh, really? As long as that?
For naked eye, it was visible for a few weeks. But of course, once it became fainter, you had to use a telescope to see it, and it would have been visible for months. And indeed now, what are we, 36 years after the event, if you've got a powerful enough telescope, you can see the remnant.
Oh, wow.
And were known as the light echoes. So quite spectacular.
That is a spectacular memory. Yeah. And I wonder how many people share that with you.
Yeah. Yes, some people do. Another one someone recently shared with me was they observed this through a telescope, was the impact of Comet Levy with Jupiter.
Oh, yeah.
I think that was the early 1990s. And they were viewing the disk of Jupiter through the telescope, but then the comet had impacted behind Jupiter, so you couldn't actually see the impacts. But then when the planet rotates around, and Jupiter rotates with a period of 10 hours, so it's pretty fast, you could see the impact sites coming into view as the...
And are they still there?
No, the impact sites are long gone.
Because it's a gas giant, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So it punched a hole through the clouds.
Yeah.
And the impact site, not really the right word here, it's more, it punched a hole through the clouds. You could see the hole that it punched through the clouds. And then after, a few days, they disappeared.
Wow. And these are all the sorts of things that we'd miss out if we didn't have contact with the night sky.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And of course, I guess another good memory would have been in Chile was seeing a comet. I think it was Comet McNaught, and seeing that the cometary tail extending from the horizon to the zenith.
Wow. Yeah.
And it was a tail which had a lot of structure to it. So that was.
So our planet was going through that tail too, I guess.
It probably did at some point. Yeah. So, but that was a very impressive sight, and that be able to see from a light polluted side. You would have to come see that for the dark sky side.
Actually, Chris, I did say I was going to wind up, but I've got one question from the beginning of this. You mentioned that the future of Siding Spring might actually include looking at the tracking of space debris or space objects that might impact the Earth. Yeah, is that what you said?
Yes, so certainly tracking satellites and the remnants of satellites to better manage our that area which is close to the Earth. A lot of that material will burn through the Earth's atmosphere and be harmless. It's more that what we want to do is prevent satellites from crashing into each other. Because if that happens, then all that debris gets distributed through that area, and then that poses even more risk to satellites which are up there. So a lot of interest in just tracking where these satellites are. Some of these satellites are known, but there's a lot of space junk up there which is just not known. Or when you launch a rocket, there's a lot of material which gets distributed in that area once you've launched a rocket. And so spanners or blunders that have been
paint
flecks.
Yeah.
Because, these materials traveling around at 20,000 kilometers an hour. So it doesn't take much to cause serious damage.
Yeah.
So we
that would be longitudinal. Does that mean that we would link up with other telescopes?
That's right. Yeah. So you need to have a network of telescopes over the Earth to make sure that you're covering every vantage point.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another reason organizations, typically space agencies, the European Space Agency is one example, JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency, is another example, who have interest in facilities at siding-springs because it gives them that longitudinal coverage which they need.
Great. Well, I look forward to hearing what happens with the future of Siding Spring. No doubt it'll still be punching above its weight in 50 years' time. And it's all due to people like you, Chris, who work hard and have a real passion for the site. So thank you for all you do, and thank you for helping protect our dark skies in Australia.
Thank you, Marnie, for the opportunity to have a chat to you. And yes, Siding Spring, the future is looking very, very, very good. And we do need to continue protecting our dark sky.
Thank you. On that note, we'll say goodbye.
Bye.